invite Professor, the Minister for the region, the representative of the Republic of Portugal here, Ambassador Pedro Catarino, and Alan Menezes and Dr. Artur Lima, Vice President of the government, regional government, and the President of the Portuguese session, João Leitão, to the table. And we have this opening session, as they call. So, before I give the floor to my colleagues in the table, I have to thank you very much for coming from all over the world, and your institutions as well that sponsor your coming to this middle of nowhere that now is the center of everything. And I think it's very interesting that you were able, and your countries, to sponsor your stay here in the Third Island and the Azores in Portugal. So the theme is Regional Science Dialogues for Peace and Sustained Development. I think we are losing the ground for peace, but anyway, we can recover also here. Maybe because we need to learn to pick up the Amartya Sen's idea that development is freedom, and that sustainability, a good word, is eternity. And how to deal with eternity, well, is the moment. We don't have other way to deal with eternity or sustainability without the precise moment of proximity. And now I pass the floor to our President of ERSA, Roberta Capello. Thank you.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives of the government, and dear colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure for me to open this 63rd European Regional Science Association Conference. I started going to ERSA conferences in 1989, and I only missed one in all these years. And I have to say that my feeling when I come here is that I have the impression that each ERSA conference is similar and different at the same time to the previous ones. Similar because I know that I will find the same nice scientific and human atmosphere. No competition among colleagues, only the willingness to discuss and to learn from each other. And this is something that I've always liked in ERSA conferences. And in any conference, I've never missed this aspect, which is, I think, very, very important and crucial for all my career. But they are also different. They take place in very different areas, in very different countries, in very different places. And each place has its local atmosphere that pervades the conference and make the conference unique with respect to the previous ones. This year we are in this wonderful place of Terceira Island. I've been here 3 times already. This is my 4th time, not only in Terceira but in San Miguel. Thanks always to my friend Thomas that kept inviting me. And I've always been very pleased to come back because you can really enjoy the natural landscape and the nice also little towns like Angra do Heroísmo, which is a fantastic place to visit. I have to say that, as you know, I started my presidency on the 1st of January this year, and I have already worked a lot together with a wonderful group of colleagues. The Vice President, Yannis Psikaris from Greece, then we have the Secretary, Rosella Nicolini from Barcelona, our Treasurer, Artur Roczowski from Poland, and all the EOC and ERSA Council members. They are fantastic because we had a lot of meetings, not only the 2 ones that we were usually having, but thanks to the online possibilities, we worked a lot, having different meetings, and we managed already to achieve an important step. As you all know, we launched a new journal called Global Challenges and Regional Science. And we did that in cooperation with a very important publisher, Elsevier, who is here. And I'm sure that the combination of ERSA and Elsevier will bring an important review, an important journal, to become an important forum of discussion. I think we covered the gap there, because there are a lot of structural changes. Our piece here, our title says that the world is drastically changing. We have a lot of challenges, and these challenges have to be received by other territories as also opportunities to grow in the best way we can do. And as regional scientists, we are obliged to discuss the best way for our territory, for the future of our territories. So I hope that this journal will, in the future, become really the forum of discussion for these huge problems we have in front of us. Going back to our conference, we have a huge conference in front of us, and it will be a wonderful one. The numbers are impressive as every year. We have around 630 papers and more than 700 people attending the conference. So we have 63 countries represented, which is an important achievement for Europe and for ERSA. We are the European Regional Science Association, but this doesn't mean that we are only European scientists. We want to discuss issues that are strategic for the world. So 63 countries represented. Among these 63 countries, Italy is the most represented. And there is a clear explanation for that. Whenever there is a wonderful place to visit, Italians are the first. So that's for sure. So we spent holidays here, and that's the reason. But apart from that, I hope that we will be there. So we have quite a number of papers to listen to and possibilities to discuss. Last but not least, we have a lot of good friends, something like 10, that accepted to take part as keynote speakers. So we will have our colleagues that will give us a keynote speech. Among all keynote speakers, I would like to stress two names that are stars, and they decided to come here for us, and I'm really grateful to them. First of all, we have, just after this opening ceremony, we have Mrs. Elisa Ferreira, the Commissioner for the cohesion policy, that accepted, despite all her duties, to be present in person to give us a speech. So I am really very, very grateful to Elisa Ferreira, Mrs. Elisa Ferreira. The second one is the Nobel Prize winner, Paul Krugman, who accepted again to be part of our conference. So he will arrive tomorrow, I think. And so he will be again with it, and he accepted to give speeches also to our students, to our young scholars. So he dedicated part of his presence here to us. So I'm really delighted to host them, and to the fact that they accepted our invitation. Of course, I would like also to thank our friends that made these, let's say, invitations become a reality. So last but not least, I would like to thank the local organizing committee, and especially the chairman, Professor Thomas Dentinho, because believe me, I spent my 10 to 12 months last 12 months to reply to his emails, because he was so committed that he made all of us work for the conference in a very serious way, and I'm sure that it will be a success. Whatever will not be perfect, it's because we are human beings. So otherwise, I know that Thomas put all his effort, and his team too, not only himself, but all his team, and the local people that have us with us. They made everything in order for us to enjoy this conference. So I wish you all a nice 4 days conference, and looking forward to meeting you around. Thank you very much.
Mr. Vice President of the Regional Government, Mr. Mayor of Angra, Madam Commissioner of European Union, Mr. Chairperson, distinguished members of the organizing committee, distinguished participants. Let me, first of all, extend a very cordial and warm welcome to all of you. We in Açores are very happy and honored by your presence and participation in this Congress, and looking forward to listening to your views. Açores is not only a beautiful place where people enjoy peace and tranquility surrounded by stunning nature, green and blue. Açores is also a forward bastion which extends the Atlantic dimension and influence of Portugal, of the European Union, and of the democratic world. Its role for the preservation and sustainability of the ocean, for the protection of the communication lines, and ensuring that the North Atlantic continues to be a zone of peace and security is of paramount importance. It has been so in the past, and it will certainly be so in the future. Let me finally express my thanks and appreciation to the members of the organizing committee who took the initiative of organizing this Congress. A special word for the indefatigable work of Professor Tomás Dentinho. Allow me also to single out and express my gratitude to Professor Paul Krugman and his wife, Professor Robin Wells, for honoring us with their participation in this Congress. I hope that you will work productively and that you will enjoy your stay in Açores. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to you all, dear Ambassador Pedro Catarino, dear Mayor of Angra, Alva Menezes, and Professor Tomás Dentinho, in your name, I compliment all your colleagues who are here from abroad. It's a pleasure to have you here in the name of the government of the Azores. And it is a pleasure and a very warm welcome to you all. And just a few words for this, this European Regional Association, Science Association here, and I forgot the most important people here from a great city, which is Oporto, and this Commissioner Luisa Ferreira, who is over there, I already saw. And thank you for your presence here. It's very important for Azores, and a very warm welcome to the north of Portugal and to Europe. Thank you for being here. And I think that just a few notes to mark that the Atlantic dimension of Europe is given by Azores. Our EEZ is one of the great EEZs of Europe, and the Atlantic dimension is, of course, increased, and the west frontier of Europe, very important, is Azores. Very important for the science, very important for the proximity to the United States, very important for the peace in the world. And I would like to draw your attention for our geostrategic space. And what I would like to mean with geostrategic space is in 5 dimensions: undersea, sea, ground, air, and space. Now, the Azores are very important for Europe and for the world in all of these dimensions. And what a better place, Professor Roberta, for regional scientists to study the development of the Europe and the world that Azores, with these 5 dimensions, which you already have work done in that matters, but I think you have a lot to do in this matter. And mostly, including in the development of Europe, as you said a little ago, you have to include the Azores in these 5 dimensions to develop Azores, our regional economy, and our contribution to the national Europe and national and international security, and for the science, the blue science, the space science. A few years ago, you have air, sea, and ground. Now we have space and undersea. And I would like you to take note of that. And European Commissioner, I finalize my intervention with a note of cohesion. It's very important for Azores Islands, the cohesion policy of Europe, and I think, as you already talked yesterday, that we have a role and a step, we have some steps ourselves to go forward in that importance of the cohesion in Europe and with the Azores. So thank you all. Very good 4 days of work, which is very important for our development and for Europe and for the world. Thank you.
Senhor Representante da República, Senhor Vice-Presidente do Governo, Senhora Presidente da ERSA, Senhor Presidente da APDR, representantes da Comissão Organizadora, Senhora Comissária Europeia, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. I'll switch to English because today as Mayor I have a very easy role here to welcome you and to tell you that it's an honor and a pleasure to have you in Angra. As you probably already went around, Angra is a small place, but it's a nice place to live. And besides, it's a very good place for meetings. It's quiet. I think we have all the conditions for you to have a successful meeting and to leave Angra and leave Terceira with a good memory of your time here. That's what we wish, and besides that, I have to tell you that what you are going to do, it's not an easy task. You are going to talk about peace and sustainable development. Those are 2 very hard themes for a meeting. I hope you are successful in your discussions and that your organization and all of us leave Terceira enriched. I want also to thank Tomás Dentinho and everybody that worked with him to make this event possible. It's not easy to organize such a big event, especially in a place like Angra, that of course it's not a big center. We had quite a few difficulties that had to be solved, and Tomás was excellent in that. So I really want to thank him for that. And I want to tell you all that he really worked hard for everything to go as it should. So thank you very much for, and I think he deserves. Well, we are colleagues at university, and I know that when he wants to do something, he really does it. So he really did it. So thank you very much, Tomás. Thank you to all the organizers, and thank you to you all for coming to Terceira. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to all of you. In the name of APDR, Associação Portuguesa para o Desenvolvimento Regional, Portuguese Association for Regional Development, I would like to present firstly my formal compliments to the President of ERSA, Roberta Capello, also to the Commissioner, Elisa Ferreira, and also for sure for the representative for the Republic of Açores, Pedro Catarino, the Vice President of the Regional Government, Artur Lima, the President of the Municipality of Angra, José Gabriel Alam de Menezes, and for sure a special presentation for the local President Committee, Tomás Dentinho. And I would like to acknowledge in the name of APDR for you all to come to this conference. And it's a great honor for the APDR to be associated with the ERSA conference in a very special place. Terceira is an example of a resilient place. It is, in fact, the utopic place for establishing dialogues for peace and for sustainable development, especially connected with the new vision of the new European Bauhaus, but especially introducing here the basis for bottom line of sustainable development. That is interlinking the economic, the environmental, the social, and sometimes a neglected one, but that is staying alive in Terceira, the cultural dimension. So I would like to welcome you all and also to acknowledge our keynote speakers. As I mentioned before, a special acknowledgement is due to Elisa Ferreira, but also to Patricio Aroca, David Aldrich, Mário Centeno, Lewis Gistra, Michael Fritsch, Simona Yamarino, Leila Kebir, Joaquim Oliveira Martins, Andrés Rodrigues Posse, Ricardo Serrão Santos, Paul Krugman, Robin Wells, and Carlos Moreno. Thank you to all. I should say it again, it's a great honor for the APDR to be connected with this excellent conference. I hope we have the opportunity to meet all and to establish fruitful dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, now let's go to work. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Roberta, Professor Embaixador Pedro Catarino, Artur Lima, Alan Menezes e João. I invite now the chair of the next section, which is Andrés Rodrigues Pose from the London School of Economics, and our friend, as also the third or fourth time coming here.
Yes.
And then you chair the session, please.
Well, thank you very much, Tomás. Dear friends and colleagues, dear dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in ERSA, please go ahead. I've been in ERSA for not as long as Roberta Capello, but almost as long. And in ERSA, I have been doing every single task that can be done. But few tasks have given me as much pleasure as the one I'm going to do right now, which is introducing the Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms, Elisa Ferreira. And for me, this is a distinct honor to introduce her, because she is not just one of the nicest persons you're going to meet ever, but she is a visionary leader that has shaped and is shaping and will continue to shape the future of Europe. She has been European Commissioner for Cohesion and Reform since 2019, and in this role, she has given cohesion policy a new elan, a new dimension, and she has become, with this policy, a driver for economic growth, but growth with social inclusion, with sustainability, and with resilience across the whole continent. So some of the topics of this conference and the next conference in Athens. But Commissioner Ferreira is first and foremost a colleague to many of us, because she started her career as a university professor at the University of Porto. So she understands her plights, our needs, she understands what we do and how to transform what we do into practice. And her trip from Porto, where we had our conference in 2004, so it's fitting that we come back to Portugal 20 years later. This journey from academia to significant social and political roles has been driven by a personal urge to transform theory into practice with a purpose. And that purpose has been to improve the lives of all people, and in particular of the most vulnerable, wherever they live. Her unwavering commitment to investing in disadvantaged groups and communities, and she can probably talk of the work she has been doing with disadvantaged communities in places like Slovakia, so the Roma community, but not just in Slovakia. I think she's passionate and truly passionate about this, highlights a dedication, a lifelong dedication to encouraging the fact that progress should not be concentrated in a few places or in a few people, but it reaches everyone in order to create a brighter future. But her impact has extended beyond her current role as her current role. She was before former vice governor of the Banco Portugal and a member of the European Central Bank's Supervisory Board, where she provided crucial financial oversight during a period in which we had very challenging times. And her long tenure as member of the European Parliament, so in excess of 15 years, and as Portuguese minister before that of planning and of development and the environment, further underscores this trajectory and this commitment to public service. I could go on and on. I said I could talk about her for ages, as so few people deserve more praise for a life promoting the well-being of others as Elisa Ferreira. But I'm sure you haven't come here to listen to me. You're here to come to listen to the star. And today, the European Regional Science Association has the enormous privilege to host Elisa Ferreira, who is at the helm of one of the most critical portfolios in the European Commission, not only for us, but for the whole of Europe, and who has been responsible of guiding Europe towards a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future. Please join me with a long round of applause in welcoming Commissioner Ferreira. Elisa, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. And it's sometimes when we are introduced with such kind words as I've been, it's quite embarrassing because you put the stakes very high, and I don't know how I can really respond to expectations. But anyway, it's really my pleasure, and I have a great pleasure being here. I would like to start by thanking the invitation, by thanking all those that were really involved and engaged in organizing this event, because I know how difficult it is, but at the same time how important it is that sometimes people that really have to address complex issues, that they have an opportunity to stay together, to exchange views, and to improve and increase their knowledge. My special thanks goes, of course, to the organizers, in the name, allow me, of Tomás Constantino, of all the entities that were present in the opening session, of Andrés Rodrigues Poza, and of course of you and all your staff for keeping this momentum going. Roberta, it's really amazing to have such a long-term with high quality series of events. And I think, in fact, coming to Terceira is also the right place. Terceira is not only this I mean, unknown jewel, as Andres mentioned today, I think in your tweet, gem, I think you called it, but also a place full of culture and full of history in the Portuguese long history. So it's really a very special place. And having said this, I also think, and I hope this will, I have a PowerPoint, I think it must be here probably. I'd like also to share with you that some of the issues that we have been debating for a long time among ourselves are now becoming very, I would say, fashionable. You only have to open a newspaper nowadays in order to find that issues that for a long time were confined to academic conferences and to debate now are bursting into the first pages of newspapers, of news, and also of a lot of speeches and a lot of political agendas. Just think of housing and congestion problems, the importance it has, in Europe's big agglomerations, how the concerns on brain drain and the loss of the best and aging is affecting our rural areas, together with human and physical desertification, in particular in a lot of southern European countries, how some communities are actually disappearing from the map. They disappear. And we have empty houses like ruins in a lot of places. And development traps that some of you, Jan Marino, Andres, and so many of you have really worked upon, and that feed populism and what we have called in the literature geography of discontent. So when you have chosen peace and sustainability as topic, this connects directly to this kind of phenomena. It is no exaggeration to say that many of the key political challenges facing Europe today are deeply rooted in economic geography. And if we are to tackle these issues, we must engage everybody, with everybody that has the capacity to act, to intervene, and that's why I was very happy to have here today members of the regional government, of the local government, and I thank them for their engagement. But also, of course, we need to raise the interest of politicians, of companies, of firms, of social partners, of NGOs, and of course, mainly of the academia, the voice of scientists like all of you. And today, my appeal, having had this responsibility for 5 years now, the mandate is finishing, but I feel more than ever how important it is to ask you and to encourage you, the researchers, to contribute to our understanding and our identification, not only of the problems, not only the diagnosis, but also to expand and to deepen the research on solutions adequate to the different characteristics of the different places. We need this. And to stir the debate, I will share with you some of the, conclusions, and I will go on developing on it and deepening it. But for this moment, some of the main lines that we in the European Commission were able to draw after this period. And of course, it was absolutely essential, all the work done in the 8th Cohesion Report and more recently in the 9th Cohesion Report and all the literature that you are producing. And so you are quoted, you are read, and we use your concepts in order to try to understand what is happening in Europe. And trying to concentrate on these main topics in order to save also your time, I would like to start by a first fact. Long-term convergence, driven at least in part, I would admit a substantial part by European cohesion policy, it works and it has worked. You're engine of the great convergence machine. That is the European Union. The European Union has been classified as such by the World Bank. And they said it a couple of years ago, and I think it makes sense. If you want just to know what I'm talking about, here you have a sequence that is published. It's not new, anything particularly new, but you can see here that these graphs that calculate the average income, GDP per capita, basic information, in the year 2000 and in the year 2023. And you see that the red lines, so the ones that are under the average, that they have expanded to the right. A GDP per capita that represented only 84% of the European GDP per capita, the average value. In 2023, this level had gone from 48 to 80%. If you take Romania, in 24 years ago, had a GDP per capita of 26% of the European average. Today, they are in 78%. If you take Bulgaria, they had 29%. Now they have 64%. You can also play around with movements in the sequence. So there are overtaking of certain countries over others. But in reality, overall, you have a massive progress that to sum it up, the 13 members that joined the European Union from 2004 onwards, they had on average, a GDP per capita in 2004, so 4 years later than the left graph, they had 52% on average, and now they have over 80% of the European average. The second fact, however, is not so positive, because this massive progress, it hides some not so sound characteristics. And in fact, since 2009, and you see in the graph on the left, more or less the half of the graph, you have convergence has continued at the national level. The line, the blue line, represents the 27 member states, and the red line in the bottom represents the initial European member states, and this graph talks about disparities. So disparities, they were going down until 2009 in both countries, so disparities were being reduced. After 2009, you have still a continuation of the reduction of disparities, so convergence in the EU at 27 member states, but for the old member states, the 15 old member states, you start having an increase of disparities in the bottom line. And this coefficient of variation within member states on the right shows also that particularly in the countries that are going very fast, so countries that joined later on, a lot of them are increasing internal disparities to a very substantial amount. So in fact, the capitals are growing very fast, but internally, some of these countries are showing already some brain drain and some hyper-concentration in the more developed areas. And the reality is that this convergence has a dynamic aspect. It existed until 2019. Since then, it has slowed down, and also you have this, I said 2019, 2009, and since then it has mixed representations over here. If you move forward, you also have a correlation between what is happening in terms of growth in the European regions, and by 2021, 1/3 of the European regions, home to about 155 million people, had not yet returned to the 2009 and 8 levels of GDP. So you can see the impact of the crisis of 2009, but also in the slide 4, you have the relationship between this calendar and the insufficient growth of productivity, with a slowdown and increasing gap, also in the international context, in particular when we compare with the United States. In this sense also, you have that generally the European Union is not converging internationally sufficiently fast. Of course, this is very broad, very rough. But on the other hand, we find a lot of internal asymmetries, of internal heterogeneity that calls attention to what causes this. And one of the aspects that seems to have a very close correlation is in fact the investment, the gross fixed capital formation in real terms by geographical area. And it seems there is the possibility that in fact one of the elements that is slowing down parts of the old Europe, so the 15 member states, is the massive contraction of fixed capital formation that started, and you take the initial year is 2008, and you see the massive contraction that is represented by the gray line. The bottom line is investment in the Southern Europe, generally defined as Southern Europe, whereas you have the red line growing up, it's northwest, and generally you see that the capital formation, so fixed capital formation, has increased and came back to normal in a lot of areas of Europe, but the contraction since 2009 has really created a lot of slowdown, particularly in the southern bloc of Europe. This is particularly of concern since the third fact, I'm sorry, I need some water. This is a particular concern, it's okay. The third fact is that some regions can now be said to be caught in a development trap. This is one of the issues that is expressed here in the graph, but as, I'm using concepts that, as I previously mentioned, lots of you have used in your papers. Now we confirm them very clearly, and I'm sure that Jan Marino and Andrés, among others, will be addressing this in much more detail. But in fact, we have regions across Europe that are stagnating and have been stagnating for a long time. To make it more readable, I don't know how easy it is, but in fact you not only have development problems of low level of development, which affects in particular Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, but whereas in Eastern Europe you have a huge growth propensity, in Southern Europe and in a lot of areas inside Europe, even regions in the north or in the center of Europe, they are not growing, even if some of them are already at a high level or reasonable or medium level of development. And this stagnation is in itself a problem that adds to the problem of permanent underdevelopment. So if you take the pink and the red, you have regions that are really of low income, and that have been for a long period. If it is red, that means that it has been for almost 2 decades, between 15 and 19 years, at a level that is below 75% of the European average. But on the other hand, if you look at France, so this gray, dark gray and light gray, you have a lot of regions, or northern Italy, you have a lot of regions that, although they have a higher than average GDP per capita, over 100%, they also are not growing. So the perception internally is that you have had a prosperous life, but that your children, the next generation, doesn't have the same opportunities that you had, and that in fact that you are stopped. And this creates a lot of other issues, a lot of other problems that in fact we find that are playing an increasing role in the political and economic performance of European regions, and that we have to take into account. The regions that stagnate, and we technically have confirmed it, tend to have lower innovation and less dynamic innovation ecosystems, a lower level of educational attainment, not sufficiently adequate R&D expenditure. The quality of government is absolutely essential. The industrial sector and the sophistication and complexity of the industrial sector is important. And this is associated with low levels of development, and some aspects of this component are also perceived at higher levels of development, but when stagnation persists. And in particular, a lot of regions have had a lot of difficulty in finding their way after having a quite a glorious past, sometimes as leaders in industry or leaders in certain sectors, but then they reach a certain stage, the industry changes, and they have a lot of difficulty in finding their way forward. So, in fact, in many development-trapped regions, in particular on those that are previously prosperous, it has had a lot of implications that this growth and this dynamic and this future, this trust in future has stopped. So it is really very important when we took on board this high-level group on the future of cohesion policy that was led by Andres and that involved a lot of other stakeholders and individuals, not stakeholders, individuals from different countries and from different origins. And Joaquim Oliveira Martins was there as well. So, in fact, this requires a lot of sophistication in defining a strategy to take a region out of such trap. And this cannot be done if the policies are place blind. Different regions, if you look across Europe, if you take this map, each of these regions is different from the other, has its own problem, has its own potential. So moving the regions forward into a future-oriented kind of agenda is in itself a very complex and a very sophisticated requirement and target. Escaping a development trap, and we have some good examples across Europe, usually this success comes from multiple fronts: governance, a minimum level of adequate decentralization at the right level, a set of coordinated and coherent sectoral and national policies that includes from education, social inclusion, innovation ecosystem, digital, transport infrastructure, business environment, and so on. So you need really a tailored intervention, and this is where I think the research has got to go to deepen now, because in fact we need to get the right level, the right policies, and then to have these synergies in order to implement them. The fourth fact that I would like to share with you is that there is a strong correlation between years spent in a development trap and political disenchantment, political discontent. The geography of discontent exactly exists. It exists. So for a region that is in fact trapped, you see, and some of your work, in particular Andreas and other people's work, have been very, very clear. And this is something that relates again to the topic of this meeting and of this conference. In fact, what does it mean for a region to be caught in a development trap? It means that you, your family, and the place where you live are stuck in time. While others forge ahead, you are left behind. So the chair, and I find it a very valuable contribution, that the chair of this session, together with a lot of other colleagues, have shown that this correlation exists because it requires, for the stability, for the peace, for the democracy, for exactly the topics of this discussion, that we take seriously on board how the trapped regions can be good sources of a lot of anti-democratic, anti-European, and a lot of non-peaceful attitudes, because the revolt grows there. In fact, long-term economic and industrial decline is such a strong explanation for political discontent that once it is controlled for, and that's what they did, many of the other usual explanations lose a lot of their statistical power. Even migration or the presence of an older population, these are often advanced as explanations, but behind the scene, this feeling of being stuck in time while the others move ahead, so that you feel that you are not capable of playing the game is not for you, is a very powerful explanation that we have to take into account. And with this, I think, in fact, we have to take into account that this Euroscepticism that comes together with this feeling, both the hard and soft versions, were fairly stable until the financial crisis, and you see it until the middle of the graph. And then with this, now I think you see the possible correlation between the different aspects that we have brought here. There is a step change with the evidence of an increase. And in fact, you see that from the first elections, for instance, for the European Parliament, where the Eurosceptic parties started by being non-represented, or they were not significant, then they became stable for a period at about 20% of the members of the European Parliament, in 79, for instance. But progressively it jumped into 30%, and now it is over 35%. So in fact, this is a feeling that grows slowly, but grows steadily. And fifth fact, and I'm conscious here that I must give you also some good positive hints, because we have them, and I wanted to share them with you, is that the policies, if they are adequate, they can sometimes mitigate these impacts. And in particular, I can show you, and these are, sorry, this is not moving. Yeah. You can see this, this is figure 1, is the behavior of the real GDP around the crisis, a financial crisis. So 2008, 2009, 2010. This is NUTS 2 regions, aggregated by level of development. So you see less developed regions are a kind of brick orange color. The more developed are in the middle, and the transition regions are the yellow ones. And if you take 2008, 2009, 2010, you see that after the crisis of 2009, all the regions kind of collapsed, but then in 2010, the strongest regions, the more developed, the middle ones, had come back almost to the previous level, and then very quickly they came back to the normal level. Whereas the weak regions, that are these brown regions, they stayed behind. And these regions that stayed behind after the 2008 crisis, some of them are still behind. Now, for comparison, you have here on the right the 2019, 2020, 2021. The sequence is the same, but the difference is that the European Union, after the COVID crisis, and as the crisis was still growing, and immediately we created strong mechanisms to counter the impacts. And in particular, regional policy offered to member states the possibility to use the funding for policies that were adequate to solve, to mitigate the drama in each of the regions that were affected. So on this opportunity, just for you to be aware, the usual cohesion funding that are, the regional fund, social fund, as you know, and the FEDER, the regional fund and cohesion fund, these funds, they were reprogrammed to the order of 23 billion, according to the needs of the different member states from each envelope. And in fact, you see that all the regions caught back, and the most difficult ones are in fact the transition regions. So this, I think, can help you to understand that if we act with the adequate policies quick enough, at least the short-term impacts that end up very often into long-term disequilibrium can be at least minimized or mitigated. Having said this, I think I would also like to share with you that the overall impact of cohesion policy is in itself a big booster to Europe as a whole. Here you see the amounts of 2014-2020 and 21-27 cohesion policy programs, how they impact the economy of all the member states. But you can also understand, and this may be not sufficiently translated by this graph, but it is clear through the macroeconomic models that we play with, that the European GDP as a whole is 1% greater because of the increased trade, export, supply chains across the EU that are triggered by the contribution of cohesion policy, even if for certain member states, of course, the impulse that comes from cohesion policy is in itself what keeps them for the time being alive and helped them, in fact, to go through the recent crisis. So convergence works, but it is not a simple story. It's much more complex than it seems. But in a nutshell, I think we can summarize that it has helped, and it helped. A strong upward convergence is a consequence of cohesion policy, and the Eastern member states show it. Reduction of disparities slowed down after the crisis of 2009. Recovery from COVID was stronger than in 2009, due in particular to this immediately reaction of the public policies, in particular European public policy and cohesion policy. Regions in a development trap, often in transition regions, so they need solutions, they need to be addressed and worked out, and the new geopolitical landscape has a considerable impact on European eastern borders. So this is a new phenomenon that we are not addressing sufficiently well yet, but anyway, it's something to be taken very seriously on board. Having said this, I think I would like to summarize and thanking you once again for your interest and attention. First, I think we must continue to make the case for cohesion policy and in particular for place-based policies because of disparities, because of development traps, because of the geography of discontent, because we cannot leave people behind. So many of the problems and challenges of today have a place-based element. You cannot talk about housing, innovation ecosystems, political discontent without analyzing the local roots from which they spring. And we must altogether argue the case for this, not only among ourselves, but outside this bubble, because it is outside that the policies are drafted. Second, we need a greater understanding of the mechanisms of regional development. As you know, there is so much we still do not master, we do not understand. For example, a fine-grained local view of how innovation and industrial policy drive economic growth, on how the economic forces in one region can be mobilized and scaled up to generate an internally competitive ecosystem that can promote jobs, long-term growth, wealth. Third, we need a better understanding of what good regional development policies look like in this new age of green tech, of artificial intelligence, and of a more competitive but less clear international environment. Over the years, such policies have gone through several incarnations, from job support, basic infrastructure, to innovation and smart specialization. We now need to be ready for the digital age, helping places make the most of this fundamental shift. We need to know how to coordinate not just place-based policies, but also how to take account of the spatial impacts of all policies. These so-called neutral horizontal policies, they have asymmetric impacts on the ground, as we all know. Regional development is not the realm of regional policies alone. All policies need to be assessed against their regional asymmetric impact. And we need to know how to deliver not just investments, but reforms at national, regional level, building framework conditions and administrative capacity, and I'd like to underline this, that will allow investment to take hold and the resources engaged to have their strongest impact. For all these challenges and more, you have the facts at your fingerprints. We count on you to use them. We count on you to push the frontiers of our knowledge, and we count on you to spread the word. In this room, there is enormous understanding of the challenges and drivers of regional development, and you work daily to increase that knowledge. But it is also necessary that, and I just mentioned it, outside this room, researchers and practitioners, academics, politicians, entrepreneurs are all aware of the impact of their decisions on regional development. We must speak clearly, we must speak convincingly, and most of all, we must speak from facts. This is no small challenge, but this is our moment in regional development, in regional science. So let us rise to the occasion and let's contribute to make the world fairer, more competitive, but better. Thank you very much.
We got some time for questions. What I'm going to do is start with 2 questions to break the ice, and then I'm sure that Commissioner Ferreira is very comfortable with getting questions from the audience. And then we'll wrap it up with one final question from me. But let me start with you've come to a forum where we're all friends of cohesion. You are in Brussels, where not everyone is a friend of cohesion. And the two arguments that come up is first, you mentioned the European Union has been a convergence machine, but if the gap between the most developed countries and regions in Europe and the richest ones has narrowed, why do we need cohesion policy? And the second argument is, well, in some places we have invested so much as Europeans, like for example the south of Italy, and relatively little has happened there. So even in those cases, why do we need cohesion policy? Can you give us some strong arguments to say we need cohesion policy now more than ever?
Well, in fact, we have discussed it very often, and I think that Europe cannot survive without the strong cohesion policy, because by definition, I mean, the free market that we want to keep, free competition, it requires some rebalancing mechanism, because the automatic rebalancing obviously doesn't exist. And so you need a public policy. And this is the basic reason why, in fact, we cannot discard or question cohesion policy. Another aspect is what is the narrative we can share about cohesion policy. That's why I started and I finished by underlining that even if we regret that not all regions have found their path for the future, but the dynamic of life is like this, but that grosso modo, if you take the massive progress of Eastern Europe and the kind of stability and also business opportunities that developed and progressive Poland, developed and progressive Romania, even if they still have a lot of problems, I mean, there are huge markets that benefit the Europe as a whole. And on the other hand, of course, you have political stability, and democracy can only function like that. Then you have regions and areas that really have been faced with a lot of asymmetric impacts, with a lot of impacts from common policies. When we spot, and everybody spots 2009 as a change in this convergence. And of course, all the effort that was done to reduce the budgets, to constrain investment, to constrain the reform of important areas like education, like public administration, all these reforms, they were stopped in a way. So this has contributed to a sort of stagnation and depression. So I think we should not send the baby with bathwater, so it works, but we need more refined agenda. We need also to concentrate on qualitative aspects, and in particular the quality of public administration, the quality of the institutions, the quality of the universities, the quality of the companies, and how they use the funding and this huge opportunity of having a partner that doesn't require from you anything else, but puts in a lot of funds, is in fact a challenge. And the biggest risk is that the funds are taken for granted, and that you don't put as much ambition, as much quality in the choices you make, in how you organize yourself to make the most of this funding. This kind of being used to being supported is the biggest risk that I find can kill the policy, because all of a sudden, I mean, you don't have more funds, and things can really go really very, very seriously wrong. So my appeal, my call is in fact in relation to the quality of the choices, to the quality of the public administration, to the information that you have and that you develop in order to make the best use of funding, but not to question the need for this funding, because without it, I think Europe definitely will break and we cannot afford it. Of course, I mean this is a very dangerous and a very dramatic scenario. So I think, in a nutshell, it works, but we have got to go region by region at the right dimension, and to see and to analyze and to detail what is the agenda, and to make sure that politicians, academic people, and the actors on the ground, that they converge in an agenda that is in fact a sustainable one.
Start sharpening your questions, because I'll be with you in a moment. But first, the cohesion policy is neck and neck with the common agricultural policy, the one with the largest budget in Europe. But when it was established, since it was established, the priorities have changed. We need a Europe that is more competitive. We need a Europe that is more productive and innovative. That's the talk in Brussels and everywhere. We need a Europe that can defend itself. We need a Europe that has to implement a successful digital and green and demographic transition. And the money is located fundamentally in cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy. Are these new priorities complementary to cohesion priorities, or are they mutually exclusive? Are they going to be promoted at the expense of cohesion policy, or can we gain by promoting, implementing both together?
Well, we have tried until now very, very hard that when you define your vision, your development track for a region, that you embody these new requirements into the agenda. I'm not particularly in favor to have specific aspects or items or lines or financial lines for digital or for greening. If you are developing your region, you have got to embody all these new elements, this new agenda, and prepare yourself to reap the benefits of these innovative areas. Because if you don't do it, this will be something that can really escape completely from your agenda. And then there is no way that artificially you are hooked into a train that is moving very fast. For this, creating networks of regions, putting the universities in contact, exchanging good experiences is what we really are aiming at. But for this, we also need to have, from the local and regional level, this capacity to open around, to open the eyes, to open the brains, and in fact to connect and reconnect. Because as you have proven, I mean, of course we expect that the greening agenda will create 2 million jobs. This is in Europe. Fair enough, but where are they going to be located? Because in order to reap the benefits of the greening agenda or of the digital agenda, all the universities, the municipalities, the regional governments, the governments, they have got really to work out their muscles so that they can be part of this. And to be part of this is quite demanding. It's not a hanging fruit. Otherwise, all these novelties that goes from space. And I found very interesting that Mr. Leal, when he was speaking about the ocean and the space here in this wonderful island. Of course, for this, the region has got to organize itself. It has got to call on the capacities worldwide, local, wherever, so that really this becomes a center of competence that really can be an important and relevant network in connection with other networks in the world. So I think there is a massive opportunity, but the danger is when you sit down and in fact you don't engage into being part of this ambitious, new and very challenging agenda.
So thank you very much. Now it's time to go to the audience. There are quite a few hands. Let me start by that woman over there. If you can say your name and also your institution, and in order to keep a question short, because there are quite a few hands, remember to start your question as a question. So by who, why, to what extent, how, and more or less like that. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to remember all these rules. So my name is Raja Shakir. I'm a researcher at INRAE in France at Paris-Saclay University. So thank you very much for the nice talk. It was very insightful. I have two very, very short questions. You mentioned that we need to improve conversions to increase growth and decrease inequality. I was wondering how we could do this in a context of environmental issues, more specifically climate change and all planet boundaries that all we are aware, since growth needs to use more resources and we are just destroying the planet with this more and more growth. So, and some of my colleagues are starting thinking about, there is some new work about degrowth, which means that we don't necessarily need growth, but we need to produce in a more sustainable way and maybe to focus more on reducing inequality between all countries, between the North and the South. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's an important question. I think it is possible to grow, to go on growing. That means adding value, but to grow with a different recipe. And we see that, and I've seen it all over the place across Europe, extremely good examples. And in general, Europe managed to grow and, for instance, to reduce the carbon footprint substantially in the follow-up of the war and of the strange management from Russia of the cutting of the fuel to the west of Europe, and by effort, by saving, by investing massively into better efficiency in houses and in public buildings, by installing solar panels, by producing combined versions of solar, wind, and other sources of energy. Europe managed to grow, but it had an historically relevant reduction of emissions, of the use of fossil fuels, so it was a different way of growing. Like this, you can really use materials that are recyclable. You can reuse water that you have cleaned, and so there are other ways and other choices to be made. And I think the support of cohesion policy has been exactly directed towards this. And in a lot of places, I think also in this island and in other islands of this archipelago, you have already, people that live with zero consumption of fossil fuels in their household, so to speak, because they have a combination of storage of energy, solar panels, reduction of losses of energy. So it's growing differently that I think we have got to work on. I would be careful. Yeah, I would be careful about stating degrowing like that. Rebalancing growth, involving everybody, and finding new recipes, I find a more solid path for us to move on.
Okay, so next question. There was a question around here, a hand. Well, if not, we go over here. Yeah, start.
Thank you, Ms. Ferreira. My name is Annie Tubaji, Swansea University, Wales. I'm a huge supporter and fan of the European Union and the cohesion policy, so everything that you said, big applause. But I have a question, and the question, as Andres required, is why? And I think this is the very important question that the European Union has to ask itself in order to be able to correct the problems which emerge in the seemingly successful but unevenly distributed success of the cohesion policy. So you very correctly said it's a question of attitude, how people take this huge opportunity that you have this big player out there, but some engage with it more than others. Then the natural question of this is why? And then the answer, obviously, is the attitude, and attitude is culture. So there is a lot about culture done in the European Union, seemingly, through the regional development stuff, but the real cultural policy is left to the separate states. And the European Union is keeping away from this. Isn't it time that something is done more in this direction? Because cultural attitudes, they may correlate with the cultural heritage, and they do. There is already research on this. The local development coincides with the local cultural heritage, but also the places that manage their cultural heritage the least, like Bulgaria, right, take much less opportunity than Italy, that manages their cultural heritage a lot. So there is some correlation there between the investment in the regional development aspect of the physical thing, what cultural heritage is, but how does this relate with attitudes, and why these attitudes relate with the cultural heritage, and why it then predicts the voting? This is a question that has to be answered by research and then taken responsibility somehow by policy. Is there a chance that the European Union will do something policy-wise about engaging with the attitudes of people, the cultural aspect of this?
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I'm sorry, but the sound here is not very clear. So when you speak, you've got to speak up because it doesn't come very clear to me. But I understood that you are asking, that's why I was checking with Andres, checking how we can, I mean, the cultural aspect of how to interact with the European Union. Is that it? Is that it?
Did you hear it at all now? So, I mean, it's attitude, how you engage with a particular opportunity, which is like the funding from the European Union.
Yeah,
It's an attitude how you vote. And all this is culture. And culture is left out of the agenda, the real proper agenda of the European Union. It's kind of a sovereignty question.
It is.
Is there a chance that this changes?
In fact, not all aspects of the life of a country are in the hands of, have been delegated by the countries to the European level. And in particular, culture or what you teach in education, or for instance, your tax system, it's your choice, is the choice. Even health, and some people don't realize about it, health was, until COVID, was only marginally in the hands of the European Union. Each country wanted to keep its own sovereignty for that purpose. I mean, culture, but there is another dimension of culture that is some principle. There are some principles of democracy, principles of that when you decide that you join the European Union, you have got to abide by them. Respect for the others, respect for the choices of each individual, respect for the choices in terms of the religion or gender. So there is a European culture, so to speak, but then inside this European, there are differences. In the case, for instance, of Bulgaria, one of the aspects that I don't know if that's what you are referring to, but in fact, there is this support, for instance, for the carbon transition, for the areas that really have to adapt to new technologies, less polluting. And there is this Just Transition Fund, which in Bulgaria raised a lot of problems. And, but finally, one of the governments, confirmed that Bulgaria was interested in receiving this support for the transition. So this is the culture of adapting to the Green Deal, which was really made of a law inside Europe, and so member countries have got to abide by it. how they do it. In fact, in this case, this was a kind of internal conflict on how you should move forward, if you should or if you should not. Of course, we respect you, but if the fund is for transition, if there is no transition, the fund is not justified. So I don't know if you are talking about this. I had lots of contacts in Bulgaria. I spoke a lot with Maria Gabriel. I speak a lot about the present. I know about the highway. I hope the highway is working. I was in Vidin. I was in a lot of places. But in fact, there is this kind of adaptation to the European culture, so to speak, that really is, I mean, if you decide to join in, you cannot just receive funds. You have got to abide by basic principles, but the principles are those that I referred to you, like respect for human rights, respect for democracy, and aspects like this. But I don't know if I answered completely your question, because it's a very complex one.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a question here at the front, right in the middle.
Giuseppe Roma, Urban Research Institute from Rome. Thanks, Lady Commissioner, for the very clear relation. But I want to follow the question. We need economic cohesion, but also political cohesion in terms of democracy. And when we talk about peace, we talk about a Europe very strong in the principle, in defense of democracy, of the human rights. But we know that the country that increase with the cohesion politics, like the Eastern country, and other countries decrease, like the Mediterranean country, like Portugal and Italy. Italy was 120% in the beginning, and now is 97%. How you think is possible to be concrete against some movement that are in countries in the Eastern Europe that are against Europe? That is a contradiction. In your table, you see that is increasing the voters anti-Europe, but are also some countries that are organizing something that is not good. So how we can exchange development and democracy as basic of a political European cohesion?
Well, that is again a very complex question. I wouldn't say that the movements against Europe are or against Euroscepticism is stronger in Eastern Europe, because in fact in Poland, for instance, the present government. So what happens is that, and on the opposite, in the center of Europe, in some of the founding members of Europe, you see a lot of movements that I would really appreciate if you could help me to understand, because you see, I mean, the Netherlands, you see France, and you see Italy. So I mean, it's not easy. This is something that I'm not sure that we can discuss here in order to clarify our minds. I understand that Europe has got to go much closer, or the European agenda much closer to the citizens. The critical aspect is how to do it. How do we manage to, because the benefits of being in Europe are absolutely evident and obvious for those that are outside. If you look at Georgians, if you look at Ukrainians, they don't need a lot of explanations. Nevertheless, internally, the slightest element of discontent or disenchantment ends up in a vote in which sometimes they want to criticize, but they end up moving into the other side of the story. And when you look at Brexit and how popular Brexit was, and how disappointing it ended to be. I think this is telling. Having said this, I think we need to perfection, to improve our internal functioning, and making sure that we look carefully at each region, at each country, but that each country and each region understands that there are duties. And in particular, I've been working a lot, and also with the Italian ministers, all of them, since Giuseppe Provenzano, Mara Carfagna, Rafael Fito, and all of them, for instance, the organization in southern Italy, because southern Italy is there from long ago. So as a regional development issue, as we all know. So trying to find an explanation of what is not functioning since the Casa per il Mezzogiorno in the beginning of the regional policy up to now, what can we do about it? Of course, because sometimes these cases in which, the problem is not the regional policy, the problem is the organization of the state itself. But it is, as the regional policy keeps helping, then the blame is on regional policy. If there is no major change in terms of reorganizing the public administration and the governance of the funding, there is no solution. And we better look or not forget about all the other regions where it worked wonderful, and it is working wonderfully, and where people are quite happy. So I think we need detailed approaches to everything that is happening across Europe, but I wouldn't go into general approaches like this, because it's blame it on Europe is also something very easy, because everything that goes right is easy to be allocated to the local politicians, and everything that disappoints is Europe. So even in the case of COVID, everybody looked at Europe and said, what are you doing? Can't you help? And in fact, we helped, and we went over our mandate and our competencies, which was a risk. And I think I'm very glad that we did it. But in fact, everybody was looking at us, not realizing that Europe had not been given by member states the competence to address basic problems of health. So this is the kind of misunderstanding that also helps to grow this kind of disenchantment and this criticism about Europe. But this is not an answer, this is a comment.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time. Simona, please. Question.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ferreira. As usual, very inspiring and also enthusiastic and hopeful. My question follows up what has been already said, because it's a question that I actually ask myself more and more. One thing that became absolutely evident with Brexit, because we were there and we saw things unfolding, was the high degree of unawareness of the people. And precisely in Wales, I still remember a few days after the referendum, the BBC interviewing farmers that were not aware that they would lose European funding, and they voted for Brexit. So my question is, how can we reach the people? How can we make the people, particularly in regions that are left behind, trapped, how can we change the narrative and go to the common people to make them evident that cohesion policy not only has worked, has shown that, it helps, it helped, it will help, and without it would have been a disaster for many territories and places. What can we do for that? Thank you.
That is the 1 million question. In fact, I think all the politicians, local, regional, need really to be alerted or wakened up, so to speak, in order to speak about Europe not in the context of a blame game and blame it on Europe, but rather as a serious political choice with all the pros and against that it includes. And this is a change of mentality that probably if things go really wrong for some reason, God forbid, but if something goes really wrong, then I think everybody will look, or everybody looks in, and looks at what unites us, what keeps us together. We had several evidence of this. After Brexit, for instance, a lot of countries that were questioning Europe, sometimes for negotiating purposes, because this is also a very not very nice but very common kind of strategy, is to kind of trade off, do horse trading on everything. So I block this so that you give me that. So this kind of practice, I think, should be limited or even banned. But it became a kind of simple way to negotiate aspects that you really want to get through inside Europe. But in fact, I think a lot of countries that used to do this, we will leave, they stopped, and this kind of narrative disappeared after Brexit and about the negative consequences of Brexit. That is very visible. So the fact that you can say, okay, if you don't like it, you can leave, but you lose what you have, helped a lot. Apart from this, I think the everyday politics and the fact that people work on very short calendar and very short-term agendas often creates this kind of simplistic narratives, and people don't realize how important and how relevant, essential, I would say, being inside Europe is. But every time I go out, every time I visit another country outside of Europe, they have, with hindsight, they can really, tell you in very, very easily. So sometimes, what are the advantages of being inside Europe? And you see that all these countries around Europe want to get in, and the ones that were planning to get out now have stopped talking about it and making it a kind of trade-off or trading methodology, and I find it very telling. So I think in themselves people know that they have the best, they benefit from the best practical experience of combining democracy and development in the world. But sometimes the short-term problems create this kind of spoiled, oh, okay, so let's leave, I don't like it, I don't want it. Apart from this, I think we need to be more engaged and more participant in the construction of Europe, rather than letting ourselves go into take it or leave it. So if people don't like one thing, they think I hate it because they are forcing me to do this, instead of going the other way, that is, let's change it because it's not working. So a permanent opening up the methods for permanent reconstruction and correction is a line that I think needs to be reinforced, so that people stop saying this is black or this is white. If I don't like the regulation, the European regulation on how to produce apples, I'm against Europe. So, there is much more in the story than just what bothers me at this moment, and probably this can be changed. But how to do it, it's not that easy. So we need really to reassess the simplicity and the easiness of listening to people and correcting ourselves.
I'm conscious of time, and I know that many of you want to enjoy this gem of an island. I'm going to allow a maximum of 4 additional questions, and I'm going to take them in groups of 2. Let's start with Sebastian and Yanis, and then we'll go back. You had your hand up before, but then when I ask you, well, let's start with Sebastian and Yanis, and then we'll go with you.
Yes, I'm going to be brief. You showed us
Can you stand up and say who you are?
Yes, Sébastien Bourdin from the IEM Normandy Business School. You showed us 2 interesting maps. The first one was about the development traps, and you mentioned that the French regions were, most of them, stuck in development traps. And you showed us a second interesting map, which is the forecasting of the impact of the EU cohesion policy in Europe. And the French regions are expected to have the least impact of the cohesion policy. So there is a trade-off here. These are regions that are stuck, and in the other way, the forecasts are saying that French region will expect a least one impact of cohesion policy. So how cohesion policy can be more effective in this type of regions?
Yes, and Yanis, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for the very inspiring, actually, presentation. And I would like to ask something.
Can you introduce yourself, Yanis, please?
Yeah, excuse me. My name is Yanis Psicharis. I am professor, come from Greece, in regional economics. And my question has to do with the EU budget and the next generation EU, especially. We have a turn, in my view, in the policies of the European Union as a response to the COVID, to the impact of COVID. It was something new because during the economic crisis, we had not responded in such a way. After COVID, we have increased the budget of the European Union, almost doubled the European Union, something someone could not imagine some years before. Now we have an EU budget reached the 2% of the European GDP. My question is, do you think that this kind of policy, and especially the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is part of this, is complementary or contradictory to regional policy, to cohesion policy? And something more, can you see this policy will move forward to the next programming period? And if it moves forward, do you think that the RRF will undermine or complement the cohesion policy? Thank you very much.
Lisa.
So, 2 very important questions. On the first question, you confront the problematic areas with the fact and the stagnation, with the fact that in the map in which you show the impact of cohesion policy, there is no correlation, so the correlation is not there. I think you are right. The reason why it is like that is because the principle of cohesion policy is to transfer more money, so to support more intensively those regions that have less capacity to help themselves. And so the lower the income, the more intense the transfers are. This is the reason why the regions that have a very low level of GDP, so GDP lower than 75%, when you calculate the impact, the transfer of money that is associated, and you see the value added, because the denominator is so small, it becomes bigger, it becomes proportionately bigger. Also, the tradition was to consider that the problem of the European development was basically a problem of underdevelopment of certain regions. I think now we have to reflect not only on underdevelopment, and there are certain regions that still need a lot of basic infrastructures, roads and sewage and schools, and of course, but it's not a smaller problem, the problem of stagnation of other regions. And this stagnation can occur over 100%, or between 75 and 100, or under 75%. That's what the graph tried to show. So, in fact, this will probably call for less grants, but it still needs some instruments, probably more financial instruments, more qualitative instruments, but we need to address the issue of stagnation as such, even when it occurs, like in the case of most regions in France, at a level of income per capita that statistically is over 100%. So what we have from the past is the reflection of this negative proportionality, so the lower the income, proportionately the more each person receives, but this doesn't mean, at least as our proposal, and it was a joint proposal also from the high-level group and from myself, that in fact we need also to take a look at developed regions and transition regions, how we can foster their development, probably through more sophisticated elements and instruments of policy, rather than mere transfers of money like you do when you have to build basic infrastructures or to address very primary problems for development, the necessary, not sufficient conditions for development. I hope this helps you to answer the question. In relation to the second question, I'm very happy and very proud to have been part of the commission that decided to create for the first time an anti-cyclical instrument, because in fact to manage everything that we do in Europe with just a budget that is 1% of the overall GDP is absolutely impossible. When the crisis struck, the expectations and the estimations were that the drop in the GDP would be, and I quote someone, I don't know, it was normal at that time, the drop in the GDP would be similar to the one that accompanied the Second World War. It would be a disaster because everything had stopped. So this initiative to go to the market and to borrow, I really supported it, and I think it helped a lot. The immediate impact that I showed there doesn't come from the RRP, because at that time in 2021 we were still organizing the legislative process and going to the markets, but in fact it created a positive prospect, which was absolutely the opposite of how the 2008 crisis was managed and ended up with this 2011 and 2012 sovereign debt crisis and all this. Now you say, is it complementary or is it not? I think cohesion policy has some characteristics that we should keep. Probably the first one is to be a place-based policy, and so having a reference in the territory. Then the method is to manage the policy in a kind of partnership. So you have the regions, you have the municipalities, you have the governments, and you have the multi-level. So this multi-level around a development plan for a region. So the truth is that certain countries, not all of them, but certain countries, used this funding, which is an anti-cyclical transition, short-term instrument, as a pure inflow of money, so to speak, And so it was very positive because it prevented the complete disruption of the country itself or of certain regions. Having said this, in certain countries also, because the projects that were ready, the projects that were less risky in order to finish until 2026 were hanging fruits. So in certain cases there was no value added, and in fact they ended up financing the projects that would have occurred anyway, and some of the projects in the most developed regions, because this is the places where you have more easiness in producing a huge amount of projects and so getting the finance for them. So I would say that in very, very broad terms, it was complementary, because it is always good for the regions that you don't have a drop in the overall dynamic of a country. But for the future, I think the characteristics of regional policy and cohesion policy should and must be kept. Although with this, this adaptation of not just looking to the weak regions, but also to help to the transition in even rich regions or transition regions that really are facing difficulties to adapt to the new challenges of the international economy and challenges. But I would not think of substituting cohesion policy for an RRP, and I think in certain countries it ended up financing those that didn't need finance, and so it was a contradiction. But as an anti-cyclical instrument, I can admit it and I can even defend it.
Thank you very much. One question over there.
Thank you. So my name is Miguel Lopes. I'm associate professor at the School of Social and Political Science from the University of Lisbon. It's a pleasure for me to be here today because I'm a fan of Professor Elisa Ferreira, also for my political career, let's say very short career. But I have three very short questions. So one is on...
Can you keep it, concentrate the questions
very short,
into one?
very short. I'll try. I was trying to keep them short, but as you kept me to the end, I'll try to keep them very short. So the first one is on migrations. So I saw your very nice data, and I saw that the most prosperous country in Europe is Luxembourg, right, in GDP terms. So, and we also saw that we also know that 1 in each 5 Luxembourg citizens are Portuguese. We also know that Portuguese people in medium terms of GDP is below the medium level of the European Union. So my point is, how do you explain this paradox, just to use a word somebody just used before, or apparent paradox, and also how do migrations relate to all this work you have done all these years? That would be my first question. Then I would have a second question. That would be, we all know you are ending a mission, personally. We hope you are not retiring. I hope you are not retiring. I won't ask you to tell us what are you planning to do afterwards. Well, although for Portuguese people, we would love to know what you are planning to do. Maybe for a republic president, who knows? We would love, at least I would, but who knows? This is just for the media to publish tomorrow. But at least for the academics like me, I will just ending. I know the speaker. I'm just finished.
I'm going to have to.
I'm just finished.
You are in the middle of your second question.
Finish.
So
if you want, I finish now.
Well, finish now, please.
Okay, 10 seconds. The question is very short. You know. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay,
tomorrow at 4 o'clock afternoon you can attend to my session.
There's more than 10 seconds. So
thank you very much, Professor Elisa Ferreira. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And congratulations to ERSA for bringing Professor Elisa to here. Thank you very much.
So, if you can answer. No, it's, yeah.
I answered already.
Oh, right, so you answer. All right.
I thought you
No, I have a last question that I'm going to keep short.
Okay.
So, you said that your mission is ending. What would be your recommendation? First, main recommendation to your successor, and then second question, what would be your recommendation to us, academics and researchers? How can we help you, decision makers, to make the policy even more effective than what it has been?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for. I feel very comfortable here in the academic framework because people are very kind. In the political world, things are really very rough. On migration? So on my personal life, I will be working. I've always worked, but I don't make plans for myself apart from going back to the university where I belong. And I hope to meet you, to go on meeting you and following each other's reflections, because I find that a very, very enriching and a very wonderful kind of activity. Apart from that, we'll see, what comes, but please don't open new doors. I'm very comfortable here. On migration, I think this is really a very important issue. You have migrations that come from outside of Europe and that politically are very sensitive. There was this, for the first time, there is a pact for migration. Probably it needs to be refined, but it is impossible to have free movement internally and then to have complete freedom from different member states. The other aspect that I think needs to be addressed is when people are forced to leave the place where they would like to be. And these two sides of the same coin of internal market, so all the freedoms of the internal market and cohesion policy was very well illustrated by Enrique Leta when he says there is the right to move, but there is the right to stay. So I think we should distinguish what is the right to move and to have a life in Luxembourg, you mentioned, or somewhere else. But this, again, cannot be generalized because you didn't go to Luxembourg. I didn't go to Luxembourg. So why? Because you had the possibility to have a proper life with your qualifications in the place where you want to be. I think one issue is the right to move. The other issue is the being forced to move, because the conditions in the place where you'd like to live, and I'm not talking about a parish, but I'm talking about generally a region or even a country, they don't offer you a minimum of quality of life. So this also calls on local politicians to be able to create conditions. Basic conditions are infrastructures. A lot of infrastructure were produced through cohesion policy, but then there is the follow-up, is what you do with the infrastructures. And for this, you need to attract companies, you need to engage the universities, you need to put in universities and companies, which is the old difficult story of how to create this kind of synergies, and you need to create a whole environment that makes you decide to stay in a place and not to be kind of pushed out of the place where you'd like to be and move to a place where you'd prefer not to have to be. Now, of course, to my successor, I think it's difficult to, I mean, probably this is a theoretical question because I'm sure my successor probably will never ask for my opinion on that. But I think we should really not lose memory of what was done, of what worked and what didn't work. And in fact, I think, first of all, not only to my successor, but to all of you, I think we need to fight for cohesion policy if we want to keep Europe together for the future. And this is not to say that cohesion policy is perfect, because all my argument was trying to refine the policy. But please don't throw the baby with the bathwater. Keep cohesion policy. And cohesion policy is a place-based, is a partnership. But going into your second question, that is from you, please refrain, I mean, not refrain, do whatever you want from this need to publish papers, but get out of the cabinets, get out of the offices, get out of the classrooms, come out and see the reality, show, analyze, and show politicians what kind of information, what kind of knowledge they need to acquire, because a politician is elected and is not obviously or necessarily an expert in how to organize a policy for the development of the region he is in charge. He may have some hints, his staff may have some ideas, but I think that more and more politicians have got to listen to the people that do research, but also the research has to focus on reasonable, clear, and practical aspects, and we need it very, very fast, because now we have cohesion policy, now we have the 21-27 period. I mean, there is a lot of work going on. So evaluation, going into the detail, detecting synergies, detecting opportunities, and I think this is life, and my life has shown that in fact we know very little, and we become very, very humble when we try to do something in real life without all the premises that we put on the board on the left side under the assumptions of perfect competition, and then life is easy. Life in reality is very, very difficult, and also politicians have very difficult tasks because they have to make trade-offs. And where you get the trade-off is really a very tricky job in which you'll be criticized always. It's part of life. It depends if you think that you are doing the right thing, and if you are humble enough to listen to the criticism and to take each of them very seriously, so that in fact the final result is good, helps you to have peace, to have sustainability, and to have a good life for our citizens. This is what I live.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ferreira.